6 weeks in that rehabilitation center after my hip replacement, and my daughter never once came to see me. Not once. I left with a walker, a plastic bag of clothes, and $43 in my wallet. Standing outside Mercy General in Tucson on a Tuesday morning in February, I called her 3 times. 3 times it went to voicemail. The 4th time she texted back, "Get an Uber, Dad. I'll cover it." She never covered it. And as I stood there on that curb, trying to figure out how a 71-year-old man with a new hip and $43 was going to get 26 miles home, a woman I hadn't seen in 22 years walked across that parking lot and said, "Mr. Callum? Is that you?" What she said next changed everything, and what I found when I got home nearly finished me. My name is Ray Callum. I spent 34 years teaching high school history at Desert Ridge High in Mesa, Arizona. I retired at 66, a couple years after my wife Norma passed. We'd been married 41 years. She died of ovarian cancer on a Thursday in April, and after that, I just kept working because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. After I retired, I moved to Tucson to be closer to my daughter, Stacy, and her husband, Glenn. They had a nice house in the Catalina foothills, one of those neighborhoods where all the driveways are paved and all the mailboxes match. Stacy had always been warm when I visited, but I understand now that visiting and living 20 minutes away are 2 very different things. Still, I sold the house in Mesa where Norma and I had raised her, moved into a rental on the east side of Tucson, and told myself this was the right thing to do. Family comes first. That's what Norma always said. The hip had been bothering me for years. By last spring it was bad enough that I was using a cane every day, and my orthopedist said if I didn't get it replaced, I'd be in a wheelchair within 2 years. So we scheduled the surgery for late September. I told Stacy about it in August. She said she'd be there. She wasn't there when I went in. She texted me good luck an hour before they wheeled me back. I told myself she was busy. She worked in real estate. September was a busy month. After surgery, they moved me to Mercy Rehab. 6 weeks of physical therapy, wound care, learning to walk again. I had a roommate the first 2 weeks, a retired postal worker named Hector, and we watched a lot of football and complained about the food together. After Hector went home, I was alone in that room most of the time. Stacy visited twice. Both times she stayed less than 30 minutes. The first visit she spent most of it on her phone. The second time she brought a flower arrangement that she set on the windowsill without asking me if I was allergic to anything. I'm not. But she didn't ask. I called Glenn a few times when Stacy didn't answer. He was always polite but vague. "Things are real busy, Ray. You know how it is." I said I did. I don't think I did. The morning they discharged me, the air outside was that dry desert cold, the kind that gets in your lungs if you stand still too long. I had my walker, my bag, a prescription for pain medication I wasn't sure I could afford, and $43 in my wallet. My car had been sitting in my rental driveway for 6 weeks. I hadn't thought to arrange a ride home. I'd assumed Stacy would come. That was my mistake. I stood outside the main entrance for 2.5 hours. I watched a man about my age helped into a minivan by 3 adult children, all of them fussing over him like he was made of glass. I watched a woman in her 80s come out in a wheelchair, her daughter running ahead to pull the car around. I watched families, lots of families. I finally called a cab. The driver was a young guy named Marco who helped me fold the walker into the trunk and didn't say much, which I appreciated. The ride cost $38. I gave him the $43 and told him to keep it. I had $5 left and no groceries at home. What I found when I got there was worse than I expected. The house was cold. I'd set the thermostat at 60 before I left for surgery, thinking I'd be back in a few days. It had been 6 weeks. The inside smelled like stale air and something sweet and wrong coming from the kitchen. I went in slowly on the walker, one careful step at a time, and found a pot on the stove I didn't remember leaving. Something I'd been cooking the night before my surgery. 6 weeks old. I won't describe it. The mail had been piling up through the slot in the door. I hadn't even gotten to the front porch yet, but I could see the little stack of envelopes through the window. Bills, a notice from the electric company, a certified letter I didn't recognize. My phone buzzed. "Stacy, hope you got home okay, Dad. Glenn and I have a listing appointment this week, but maybe we can come by Sunday. I sat down in my armchair and looked at the ceiling for a while. That's when there was a knock at the door. I almost didn't answer it. I was exhausted. My hip ached. I had $5 and no food and a certified letter on the floor that I hadn't opened yet. But something made me get up. She was standing on my porch looking exactly the same as I remembered her, except not. Same eyes, same way of tilting her head to the right when she wasn't sure about something. But she was in her 40s now. Dark coat, car keys in her hand. "Mr. Callum," she said. "I thought that was you." Her name was Jenna Marsh. She'd been in my AP history class in 2001. She'd been the kind of student who did extra reading and then argued with me about it, which was exactly what I wanted students to do. After graduation, I'd lost track of her like I lose track of most of them. You teach long enough, the faces start to blur together unless something makes them stick. Jenna stuck because of the argument she'd made about the Missouri Compromise that made half the class genuinely angry. She'd been right, for the record. "You look like you just got out of the hospital," she said, which was observant and accurate. "Rehab center," I said. 6 weeks. Hip replacement." She looked at the walker, then at me. "You live here?" "I'm visiting my mother. She's 3 houses down." I told her yes, I'd moved to Tucson a few years ago to be near my daughter. "Is she coming by to help you settle in?" Jenna asked. I didn't answer fast enough. She read it. "Come on," she said. "I'll help you get sorted. My mother's already asleep." I tried to tell her she didn't need to. She was already walking past me into the kitchen. She threw out the pot. She wiped down the counters. She made 2 phone calls, and 40 minutes later her husband showed up with 2 bags of groceries, essentials, eggs, bread, soup, coffee, things I could manage on my own. They didn't make a production out of it. They just did it the way good people do things, without waiting to be thanked. While her husband, whose name was Phil, unpacked the groceries, Jenna sat down at my kitchen table and looked at the certified letter I'd set there. "You want me to read that?" she asked. "Go ahead," I said. She picked it up and opened it carefully. She read it once, then again. Her expression changed in a way I didn't understand yet. "Mr. Callum," she said, setting it down, "when did you give Stacy power of attorney?" I felt something drop inside my chest. I didn't. She turned the letter so I could see it. It was from a title company in Scottsdale. It referenced a request submitted by my authorized representative to transfer the deed on my rental property, my home. The letter was dated 3 weeks after my surgery. I stared at it for a long time. I never signed anything like that. Jenna's face was careful and still. "What does Stacy do again?" "Real estate," I said. Phil stopped unpacking groceries. He and Jenna looked at each other. "Mr. Callum," Jenna said slowly, "I'm a paralegal. I've been working in real estate law for 12 years. She tapped the letter. "This document references a durable power of attorney filed with Pima County. Someone with that document has the legal authority to make decisions about your property, your finances, your medical care." "That can't be right," I said. "I never signed anything like that." "Were you on any pain medication right after surgery?" I thought back. The first week in that hospital bed was mostly a blur. Morphine for the pain. Stacy had come once early on. She'd had a clipboard. She'd said something about paperwork for the insurance company, that it was just to help the hospital bill go through correctly, that I should just sign here. "Dad, don't worry about it. It's just a formality." I told Jenna what I remembered. She didn't say anything right away. She just nodded slowly, the way you nod when something confirms something you already suspected. "We need to pull those county records first thing in the morning," she said, "and you need to go through every piece of mail in that stack tonight." We went through everything. It took 2 hours. Phil made coffee and Jenna organized things into piles, things that needed immediate attention and things that could wait. In the pile that needed immediate attention, we found a loan document. My property had been used as collateral for a personal loan, $85,000, signed, according to the document, by my authorized representative. Dated 5 weeks after my surgery, while I was still in the rehab center, while my daughter was texting me that she was too busy to visit. I said I needed a minute. I went to the bathroom and stood over the sink and ran the cold water. I looked at myself in the mirror, 71 years old, retired schoolteacher, hip that still hurt, $43 that were now $5, and my daughter had borrowed $85,000 against my house. I went back to the kitchen table. "Tell me how bad it is," I said. Jenna told me. She wasn't cruel about it. She was direct, which was what I needed. She said the power of attorney, if obtained while I was on morphine and unable to fully understand what I was signing, was potentially invalid. She said we'd need an attorney, a real one, not just a paralegal, but she knew someone. She said the loan might be reversible, but we'd need to move fast. She said the county filing was recent enough that we had options. Then she said something I didn't expect. "Mr. Callum, the thing that made me stop when I saw you on that porch wasn't just that I recognized you. It was the way you were standing. I've seen that look before. You reminded me of my grandfather the year my uncle started making decisions for him that my grandfather never agreed to." I looked at her. "My grandfather lost his house," she said simply. "I was 19. I didn't know enough to stop it. I've spent the last 20 years learning exactly enough to stop it." We sat there for a moment with that between us. "You were my best student," I said finally. "Worst one to argue with." She smiled. "You told me once that if you couldn't defend your position out loud, you probably didn't believe it as much as you thought you did. I still believe that." "Good," she said. "Then you're going to need to say out loud what you want to do about your daughter." That night, after Jenna and Phil left, I sat in the dark living room for a long time. I thought about Norma. I thought about the way she used to talk about Stacy, always with this particular kind of careful optimism, like she was building a case for something she wasn't quite sure about herself. I thought about a conversation we'd had 6 months before she died, out on the back porch in Mesa on a warm June evening, both of us with iced tea, because neither of us drank. Norma had looked out at the yard for a long moment and then said, "Ray, I need to tell you something about Stacy that I should have told you a long time ago." I'd asked her what she meant. She'd shaken her head and said, "Never mind. You've always seen the best in people. I don't want to change that." And then she'd changed the subject, and I'd let her, because she was sick and I didn't want to push her on anything. I'd never found out what she meant to say. Sitting alone in that dark house, I started to wonder. Norma had kept her files in a cedar chest at the foot of our bed, the one we'd moved from Mesa to Tucson when I relocated. I hadn't opened it since she died. I'd told myself I was protecting her privacy. Really, I just couldn't face it. I opened it that night. Most of it was what I expected. Insurance documents, old tax returns, a folder labeled house with 30 years of mortgage paperwork from Mesa. A smaller folder with copies of both our wills. At the very bottom, under everything else, in an envelope with my name on it in her handwriting, was a letter. I held it for probably 10 minutes before I opened it. "Ray," she wrote, "if you're reading this, then I've run out of time to say this to your face, which is what I deserve to have to do. This is the coward's way, and I know it. But I couldn't leave without telling you. When Stacy was 24, she took money from our joint savings account, $11,000. I found the withdrawal notice tucked in a jacket she'd left in the laundry. I confronted her. She cried. She told me she'd made a mistake with a credit card, that she was scared to tell you, that she'd pay it back before you noticed. I believed her, or I wanted to believe her. I took money from my own account and covered the gap and told myself it was a loan between mother and daughter and that it was fine. It was not fine, Ray. She never paid it back, and the lying didn't stop. It got quieter, but it didn't stop. I watched her for 20 years learn that love from us meant no consequences. That is not a lesson a child should learn. I taught her that. I let her learn it every time I made excuses and covered for her and didn't tell you. I am so sorry. Please don't make my mistake. Whatever she does, and I am afraid of what she might do, please hold her accountable. Kindness without limits is not kindness. I know that now. I knew it for years before I was willing to say it. I love you, Ray. I love you both. But I failed you both. Please don't let her do to you what I let her do to me. Norma, I sat on the floor next to the cedar chest for a long time. The letter was dated 4 months before she died. She'd had 4 months to hand it to me. She'd put it at the bottom of a box instead. She'd been carrying this for 20 years. I thought about all the times Norma had seemed distant around Stacy without explanation. The way she'd go quiet at family dinners when the conversation turned to money. The look on her face every time Stacy mentioned a new car or a renovation to the Catalina Foothills house. I'd thought she was just tired. She'd been carrying 20 years of guilt and watching it grow. I called Jenna at 7 the next morning. I apologized for the hour. She said she'd been awake for an hour already. I told her about the letter. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mr. Callum, I need to put you in touch with someone today. His name is Rick Yarbrough. He's an elder law attorney. He's very good, and he owes me a favor." Rick Yarbrough met with me that afternoon in a small office near the University of Arizona campus. He was in his early 50s, plain-spoken, no framed diplomas on the walls, which I found reassuring. He listened to everything. He read the loan document and the title company letter and Norma's letter. Then he asked me a series of careful questions about the day I'd signed the power of attorney in the hospital. "Did you read the document?" he asked. "I could barely read the food menu," I told him. "I was 3 days out of surgery. I was on morphine." He nodded, writing. "Did your daughter explain what the document was?" "She said it was for insurance billing." "Did she say anything about granting her authority over your finances or property?" "No." He set his pen down. "Mr. Scott Callum, a signature obtained from someone under the influence of medication that impairs judgment is legally invalid. More importantly, using a power of attorney to take out a personal loan without your knowledge or consent is fraud. The question is whether we want to pursue this civilly or involve law enforcement." I thought about Norma's letter. I thought about 20 years of quiet covering and what it had cost her. "What would you do?" I asked him. He looked at me steadily. "I'd involve law enforcement. But that's a hard road. It means your daughter gets arrested. It means a trial. It means everything becomes public. Are you prepared for that?" I said I needed to think about it. That evening, Stacy called. She was cheerful the way she gets when she's slightly nervous. "Just checking in, Dad. How are you settling back in?" "I went through my mail," I said. A pause. Short, but there. "Yeah? Anything important?" "There was a letter from a title company," I said, "about my property." The pause this time was longer. "Dad, I can explain that. Glenn and I were just—" "There was also a loan document," I said. $85,000 against my house." Silence. "I'd like you to come over tomorrow," I said. "Bring Glenn." She came, but she brought her composure, the practiced kind, the kind that takes years to build. Glenn sat beside her on my couch looking at the carpet. Jenna sat in the corner chair. Rick Yarbrough sat at my kitchen table with his briefcase open. When Stacy saw Rick, her composure cracked a little at the edges. "Who is this?" she said. "My attorney," I said. "Dad, I don't understand why you need an—" "Stacy," Rick said calmly, "I represent your father in a matter involving a durable power of attorney filed with Pima County in October of this year. We believe the signature on that document was obtained without your father's informed consent. We'll be filing a motion to revoke it. In addition, the personal loan secured against this property without your father's knowledge constitutes fraud." Glenn stood up. "I don't have to sit here and—" "You can leave if you want," Rick said pleasantly. "But the documentation follows you regardless." Glenn sat back down. Stacy looked at me. Her eyes were wet. "Dad, I was trying to help. Glenn's business has been struggling and we needed—" "You borrowed $85,000 against my house," I said. "I was in a rehab center. You told me the paperwork was for insurance billing. I was going to pay it back. Your mother said the same thing." She flinched, hard, the way you flinch when something lands somewhere you didn't know was open. "What does Mom have to do with this?" I reached into my jacket and took out the letter. I set it on the coffee table between us. "She left this for me," I said. "She wrote it 4 months before she died. I found it last night." Stacy stared at the envelope. She recognized the handwriting. I watched her read it. I watched her face move through something I can't fully describe. Recognition, grief, a kind of shame that isn't performance. That's the real thing underneath. Glenn reached for her hand, but she moved it away. When she finished, she set the letter down very carefully on the table, like it was fragile. "She never told me she felt this way," Stacy said quietly. "She carried it for 20 years, I said. She died with it. You let her. The room was very still. I'm filing a report with the Pima County DA's office tomorrow, Rick said. Callum has agreed to give you until then to make any arrangements you wish to make. I'd strongly encourage you to contact your own attorney tonight. They left. Glenn's face was unreadable. Stacy paused at the door and turned back to look at me. I thought she might say something. She didn't. She just looked at me for a moment and then walked out. That night, Jenna sat with me on the back porch. It was February and cold, but we had coats, and she'd made coffee. We looked at the backyard, which was desert landscaping, gravel and a few saguaro, nothing to maintain. Norma had wanted a garden in Mesa. She'd grown tomatoes and zucchini and something she called volunteers, which were the plants that just came up on their own from seeds in the soil. She said volunteers were always the strongest plants because they'd chosen to be there. I told Jenna about the letter. She listened without interrupting, which is rarer than people think. When I finished, she said, "You know what strikes me most? Your wife tried to protect your daughter from the consequences. She thought she was being a good mother, and your daughter looked at that protection and understood it as permission." "That's exactly what she said," I told her. "Almost exactly. The worst part is that it wasn't either of their faults, not entirely. It's the gap between what we mean and what gets received. Your wife meant grace. Stacy received impunity. We sat with that for a while. I taught for 34 years, I said. You know what I always told students about history? The most dangerous thing you can do is see a pattern and decide it doesn't apply to you." Jenna smiled. "I remember you saying something like that. I ignored the pattern in my own house for 40 years. You didn't know," she said. "Norma made sure you didn't know." "Yeah," I said. "I know. I'm still angry at her for it." "Is that terrible? That seems entirely human to me," Jenna said. The DA opened a formal investigation 3 weeks later. The process was slow and uncomfortable, and exactly as public as Rick had warned me it would be. My neighbors knew. People at the grocery store knew. I ran into a former colleague at the pharmacy who didn't know what to say to me, and ended up talking about the weather for 4 minutes. Stacy's attorney filed a counterclaim arguing that she'd acted in good faith, that she'd had genuine reason to believe I would have consented to the loan if asked, that the power of attorney had been signed voluntarily. Rick dismantled this systematically. The hospital records documented my medication levels. The timestamp on the power of attorney filing was 48 hours after I came out of surgery. The pharmacist who filled the original prescription confirmed the dosage would have significantly impaired cognitive function. Glenn, to his credit or his cowardice, depending on how you look at it, accepted a plea deal first. He admitted to initiating the loan application. In exchange for his testimony about the sequence of events, his charges were reduced. He and Stacy separated 2 months into the investigation. I didn't feel satisfaction about that. I mostly felt tired. Stacy's case took 7 months. I won't walk through every step of it here because some of it I still don't fully understand, and some of it I don't entirely want to revisit. What I will tell you is that in the end, she pled guilty to 1 count of financial elder abuse and 1 count of fraud. She was sentenced to 18 months suspended, probationary terms that included financial restitution, 2 years of mandatory counseling, and no contact with me for 6 months unless I initiated it. The judge, a woman in her 60s who reminded me a little of Norma in the way she spoke, looked at Stacy during sentencing and said something I've thought about since. She said, "The tragedy here is not that you needed help. It's that you didn't trust your father enough to ask for it. Honestly, that's a failure of the relationship, not just the law." Stacy looked at me when the judge said that. I looked back at her. I don't know what was on my face, probably too many things. Rick filed the motion to revoke the power of attorney. The loan was voided by the court. My house stayed mine. I had a follow-up appointment with my orthopedist in March. My hip was healing well, better than expected. He said I'd probably be able to walk without the walker by summer. I told him that was good news. He asked if I had someone helping me at home. "A former student," I said. He raised his eyebrows. "She lives 3 houses down," I said. Jenna and Phil had gotten into the habit of checking in on me. Not every day, not in a suffocating way, but the way decent neighbors do. Phil fixed a leaking faucet in my bathroom that I'd been ignoring for a year. Jenna's mother, who lived down the street and whose name was Caroline, and who made excellent green child stew, started leaving portions on my porch on Sundays. I started substitute teaching in April. Just a few days a month at first. Tucson Unified, high school level, history when they needed it, English when they didn't. I'd forgotten how much I missed it. The particular noise of 30 teenagers at 8 in the morning. The way a conversation can turn on a single question if you ask it right. In May, I got a letter from Stacy, handwritten, which surprised me. 4 pages. I read it once and set it aside and didn't read it again for a week. Then I read it 3 more times. She said a lot of things in it. Some of them were true. Some of them were excuses dressed up as explanations. But somewhere in the middle of the 3rd page, she wrote something that was neither of those. She wrote, "I've been thinking about Mom, about what she said." In her letter. I've been in therapist ops and my therapist says, I've been confusing love with unconditional tolerance my whole life. I think I got that from watching Mom. I think I gave it back to you as cruelty. I don't know how to fix that yet, but I wanted you to know I'm trying to figure it out. I kept that letter. I put it in the cedar chest next to Norma's. The contact restriction lifted in August. Stacy called me on a Thursday evening in September, almost exactly a year after my surgery. We talked for 40 minutes. It was awkward in places and honest in places, and occasionally it felt like talking to someone I only partially recognized. That's probably how it felt to her too. She asked if she could come visit sometime. I said I needed a little more time. She said, okay, that was the right answer for both of us. Not forgiveness on demand, not closing a door. Just 2 people in a hallway that's still too narrow, both of us trying to figure out how much room we actually need. On a Saturday in October, I was out on the back porch in the morning. It was the good kind of October in Tucson, dry and still warm, the light coming at a low angle the way it does in fall. Caroline had left green child stew on the porch the night before. I had a bowl of it reheated and coffee, and the newspaper, which I still get because I'm 71, and that's what I do. Jenna came around the side gate the way she usually does. She had her coffee. She sat in the other chair. We didn't talk for a while. That's one of the things I value most now, the company that doesn't require filling. My wife used to say, I said after a while, that the best teachers were the ones who had learned something hard and were still a little angry about it. Jenna looked at me. Were you angry when she said that? No, I said. I thought she was talking about history. Jenna smiled and looked out at the yard. One of the saguaro had a wren's nest tucked into a hole in its side, the way they do. The wren was coming and going. She was probably talking about you, Jenna said. Yeah, I said. I know that now. The light moved across the gravel. The wren came back with something in its beak and disappeared into the cactus. Somewhere down the street a car started and pulled away. The morning was very quiet. I thought about Norma's volunteers, those plants that came up on their own because they'd chosen to be there. I thought about a paralegal in a dark coat who stopped on a cold February morning because she recognized a man who'd once told her she could argue better than she knew. Some things you plant, some things you earn, and some things, if you're lucky and you've lived right enough and you haven't closed your door all the way, come back to you on their own.